I have a few slides because I'm trying to answer this big question, trying to predict the technology race between China and the U.S. Right? This is sort of the biggest question. It's going to be a quantitative question, so I have to show you some slides. I'm not sure if you can see the slides clearly.
Yep.
I'm trying to talk through the slides too. There's quite a few numbers I'm trying to show you. Well, given the interest of time, I will first just throw you the conclusion. The conclusion is that you can see the slide, right? The conclusion is that China will, in the short run, China will continue to outpace and surpass the U.S. in quite a few areas in the next 10 or 20 years. But in the long run, China needs to have more babies, and the U.S. needs to be continue to be open. That's the conclusion. And then I'll show you. Oh, it's not funny. Why is it funny? Okay. And then I'll show you the data and the logic, and let's see if you agree with me. Okay. Now there's many dimensions you can analyze the race between China and the U.S. And so far the data has been shown that the race is very close. Okay. There are many dimensions like the high-tech exports, R&D investment. I just show you a few outcomes in the interest of time. First, I just look at the number of papers published by Chinese and the U.S. In the top journals, and these are the numbers. The U.S. is far ahead of every other countries in the world, but China is coming from very low to almost as high as the U.S. in the very recent years.
Did you go forward a slide?
Okay, yeah, this slide. Okay, you got the idea. Okay, that's just one outcome I'll show you. There's a lot of other outcomes, which also show that the U.S. China are now very close. China is catching up with the U.S. very fast. Now, I'm just going to analyze it from a human resource point of view. That's kind of input. Well, the input will ultimately determines the output, right? One way of looking at the input is research as a percentage of GDP. China is currently about a little over 2%. It was coming from a very low level 10, 15 years ago. Now it's 2%. The U.S. is 2.5, 2.6%. So it's actually quite close now. But that's just the dollar number, right? In terms of absolute dollar, China is also pretty close because the U.S. and China GDP is quite close. But in terms of the number of people or number of researchers, actually, if you look at the number, China is already ahead of the U.S. in terms of number of researchers because the engineers, the researchers in China still cost about half or a third of that of the U.S. So if you look at the number of people, number of talents throwing at the research development, China is ahead of U.S. So by this dimension, China's input is already greater than that of U.S. and it will continue to increase rapidly relative to U.S. So then the big question, of course, China has 4 times population. China has a lot more college graduates, 3 times more college graduates graduating every year. Of course, China will win a number game. But what about quality? People ask, how do you compare the quality of researchers to that of US, right? For example, one dimension is looking at the quality of college graduate students, college graduates. Well, economists are not very good at comparing college graduates across different countries. If you look at the literature, there's not much. Or you can compare the high school graduates by PISA tests, but there isn't an equivalent test of college graduates. But there's one way, I have to come up with some numbers, so I have a rough way of calibrating that. Just look at the quality of college graduates by looking at how many PhD students that top US institutions admit from different countries. Well, we kind of assume the best college graduates all want to come to Stanford or other institutions, the top US research programs to get a PhD. And how many students that top US institutions admit from that country is kind of telling that how great the quality of the undergraduate programs is. So I use that metrics to calibrate the numbers. Now you can look at the number. China is currently about a third of the foreign non-US citizen doctorates awarded in the science of engineering is Chinese nationals. And India is about half of that, and Western Europe about 15 to 20% is about half, is about the same as India. So if you divide by the number of population, you get the per capita doctorates generated per million population in that country. So you compare that number to China, compare the number to other countries, and China is actually number one. China has, by that number, China generates the most US PhDs per million population in the world. China is up there, and they're followed by Western Europe, Germany, UK. India is pretty good. Japan is actually one of the better ones in developed country, but Brazil and other developing countries lag far behind. So compared to other developed countries, China is at least as good in terms of quality and much better than other developing countries. So it's one measure of quality. So China has this, a bigger number and a good quality. So China is looking very well in terms of input. But that's the good news. The bad news for China is that China has a demographic problem, meaning that China is not having enough baby. So partly due to this one-child policy, partly due to other socioeconomic factors, China is having fewer and fewer babies. China has one of the lowest fertility rate in the world, about 1.3, 1.2 per woman. So China will have a declining number of younger people. So this picture shows the effect. Now China the total workforce will decline slightly, but the number of older workers aged 45 to 64 is kind of stable, but the number of young workers aged 25 to 44 will decline rapidly in the next 20 years, declining from over 400 million to just over 300 million, a 30% drop, a more than 30% drop in the number of young workers. That's actually very dramatic. Nothing like that has ever happened in other countries in the history. So this could have a very negative effect on China's overall economy and the population and innovation. I actually had a book on this, just the effect of aging population innovation. And I also had a paper co-authored with my advisor, Ed Lazier, recently published on JPE. So if you're interested, you can dig deeper by reading the book and the paper. But in general, this will really hurt China's innovation in the next 10, 20 years. But people are pessimistic about this, but that's just one side of the story. The other side of the story is that China still have a huge momentum to upgrade its overall human capital. Now, this number shows even though China has a rapidly declining younger workforce, China's, if you count the number of young college graduates, that number is still going to increase very significantly in the next 10, 20 years. That's only because China just recently, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, recently expanded its college enrollment program. So it massively upgraded its human capital in terms of the number of people getting educated by getting higher education. So the next 10, 20 years, if you count the number of people getting a college degree, having a college degree, that number is continuing to increase. And that's still going to be bigger, much bigger than that of US. Okay. Now let's look at the US. So US, even though the absolute number of college graduates is only like a third, a fourth of that of US going the next 10, 20 years, but US is this huge advantage of able to attracting other talents from around the world. But how do you quantify that? You know, we always know that the US has the advantage of attracting immigrants and foreign talents. But I haven't seen a good analysis or a good calibration of that, trying to quantify the effect. Now, I will try to get a stab at that, but also looking at the number of foreign-born PhD candidates in the US university. Well, this is the share of foreign-born PhD students in the US university, ranging from almost 50% to 20%, 30%. But if you look at the most innovative fields like engineering, computer science, mathematics, is actually close to 50%. And the other perspective to look at it is to look at what share of high-tech companies were founded by immigrants. That number is ranging from a third to 40%, so almost half. So actually, it's almost half. So I will say the US effectively is doubling its talent pool size by immigrants or by attracting other talents around the world. So now let's go to the conclusion, trying to compare these two numbers. Okay, I compare the young graduates in China and the US, but also US not just having his own US nationals, but also foreign talents, and the effect will be doubling the size of its own young graduates. So you see the numbers. So these lines, the flatter lines are the US level, and also I'm doubling it, and the yellow line is the China level. And it seems to be in the next 10 or 20 years, you see China is going to surpass US. It's very close, okay, and surpass the US a little bit. Then in the 20 years later, it will start to come down, and it will continue to come down. The US will continue to go up. So the race is very close, and China seems to be winning in the near term. It will be winning in the short run, but in the long run, U.S. still going to come out ahead if U.S. continue to attract a lot of immigrants. And there's still a huge line, as you know. There's a huge line waiting to get H-1 visa here, right? So if U.S. can relax a little bit, attracting more talents from around the world, the U.S. actually should not be too worried about China in the long run. Okay. It's really the China should worry about not having enough baby. And the other way, I'm still very optimistic about China too, is China's overall economy in general. I've shown this slide probably last year, but I want to emphasize again, given China's current innovation capability, well, let's say if China doesn't improve its innovation capability in the short run or in the near term, which is, China will definitely improve its capability in the near run. But say that China is not improving, just remain at the current innovation capability level, China is still relatively poor, much poorer than it should be at this level, because China is actually more innovative at a per capita level than some of the less innovative developed countries like Spain and Italy or whatever. But China is only, per capita basis, is only a third of these countries. So China still have a lot of potential even at this current innovation capability level. That's why I'm very optimistic of Chinese macroeconomy also in general. So I give you all the numbers, and you can look at my book for the details. But my conclusion is that China will continue to outpace and surpass the U.S. in the next 10, 20 years. And in the long run, China needs to have more babies and U.S. needs to be more open. And I was just, the last point, it's very difficult for China. Well, given all the, power and resource the Chinese government has, that it's still a very difficult job to persuade the young Chinese today to have more babies. So China will, I think in the near run, in the short run, China will do fine and do very well, but in the long run, US should be more confident about this race. Thank you.
My honor to be invited to give some kind of talk. So I work for internet and AI for like more than 20 years. Start a company and make some investment and do some research. So and have some thoughts. Today I'll share some of my own thoughts on the internet and AI innovation and development. So firstly, we got conclusion from data. So this show the big internet companies in the States. So we can see the bubble means the company, the bigger, means the bigger market cap. And there's years, there's colors. Color means there are different type of internet companies. I will explain later. So that's China. China basically have a similar. So when we think about the top 10 biggest corporation in the world, states accounting, 8, and China accounting for 2. But in these 10 companies, actually, 7 of them are technology company and 5 of them are internet company. Actually, they only founded around 20 years. So that means it's hard to build up a 100-year company now. And the young company actually have a super strength to grab. So when we do the comparison between US and China, we can see much of them actually are same or similar. So in the States, we have Yahoo, but in China, we have seen Amazon, Alibaba, Google, Baidu, Facebook, Tencent. It's kind of, we got, a mirror. States and China have the same companies. But, most of them are same, but there is very few of them actually, they're different. Think about YouTube. Actually, there is no compression company in China same as YouTube, a short video in the 05. But there's TikTok, in the 2015, basically 10 years later, there's a comparable company. Airbnb and Meituan, the guest speaker in the early morning talk about Meituan, because in China, it's a big city, it's a big population, it's good for Meituan. Airbnb states difference is, the states basically people more trust each other and more safe. But in China, people more care about safety and privacy, especially in the family. We don't want some, somebody we don't know stay in the home. We feel unsafe. So there is some, difference, but mostly similarity. So it's any kind of driver or we see invisible hand behind the development of internet. So from the chart, we can see, the yellow bubble actually the portals, and the orange bubble I call it vertical service. It's focused on industry, and the right bubble it's multimedia or streaming service, and the blue bubble actually it's a mobile service. So when we give them colors, we can see, they actually get together, they keep together. Within 10 years, there's a big wave of new opportunity. So when we look at, what is a driver behind the development. And from my point of view, it's like, firstly, mobile or non-mobile. Secondly, it's speed of internet connection. So in the very beginning, 1995, the speed of connection only can let the internet transfer the text very good. For the image, it's very low quality. So the portal is good because it gives you information. But 2000, it's allow you to transfer high quality image. That's very important for a vertical service. You can nearly put everything online. So it's a big boom for our vertical service. They are now the big giants. So go to 05, the streaming, the broadband. Go to 2010, it's basically mobile. Mobile is important because a lot of service, basically, you cannot use it in fixed line. So where are the new opportunities? So there's a big debate in China. I don't know whether in the States when there is mobile internet. So somebody say there will be mobile search engine, mobile Baidu, mobile Alibaba, mobile Tencent. They will beat the old one, but things not happen. So still like Google is still Google, Baidu is still Baidu. The mobile doesn't change the big giant, but they give new opportunities to the company. For example, in the transportation, so there's Uber and Didi. There's no big tech giant in this area. In the hotel, Airbnb, local service, Meituan. It's more like, when there is new technology, what we should do is go into the traditional industry. There's no big technology giant. It's more opportunity to build up new big corporation. So the development of AI, so firstly we come back. From my point of view, every 5 years there's new wave of opportunity. And this wave basically we can see it's plus and minus 5 years, it's 10-year span. So it's 1995 portal, 2000 vertical internet service, 2005 streaming, 2010 it's mobile service, basically 3G, can basically transfer the high quality image. 2015 mobile streaming, but 2020 it's 5G. I will talk later. But for AI, the first wave is 2015. Basically, it's the beginning of the AI age. Most of the service actually called 2B service. The company was founded, and most people don't know what they can do, and they come to the business corporations. What do you need? And you need something, I do something. It's basically do everything. It's like portal age. We use internet to serve our customers what they need and what I do. So, but I personally believe in 2002, roughly minus and plus 10 years, there's a big wave for the vertical AI service. It basically use AI to solve vertical industry problem. And it will grab the new big giant, like Google, like Alibaba. So what's the current opportunity for innovation? So we are, 2019, roughly to 2020. So from my point of view, there's two waves still. Like firstly, it's internet. We are entering 5G age. So when we do the innovation, we should consider what's the difference between the new technology and the old one. So the 5G basically give you super high speed. So it's the opportunity for this. Basically, I don't know. So when you think about like fixed line, the broadband, goes super broadband, fiber, we haven't seen some big innovation. But for the 5G is there, I don't know. But 4G is very good for streaming already. So we see the TikTok, right? The low latency, is that good? I think it's good. Basically can allow you real time to interaction with the things. So the other thing is low power consumption and low cost. I think this is very important. If we think about IoT, so the cost have to be very low. So in the key thing here is find the right application, basically can use the features of 5G, solve the vertical industry problem, or solve the customer or users problem. For the AI, I think it's a vertical solution age. So firstly, we see the higher computing power and a larger deep learning model. So we can solve more and more problems in the future. But the key here is now, firstly, it's focus on some vertical industry. AI cannot solve everything. A company cannot solve everything. Focus on industry, solve the industry real problem. And if the AI face some traditional industry, there will be super big opportunity. For example, AI plus healthcare, AI plus transportation, there's real big opportunity. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Beigene's a company that's fighting for cancer. You probably don't know it, but I want to talk about that. I want to talk about a global imperative. And I think that what we're trying to do at our organization is kind of a microcosm for what's happening in China-US relations. So I believe right now, this is a moment that matters. And we get those in our lives, but the China-US relationship is very important to the future of the world. And we're at Stanford, we're at the China Economic Forum, we should be talking about it. And I'm going to try to talk about it a little bit. My main concept is, I think there's some challenges that are global in nature. Unquestionably, if there's an area in which we should be working together, cancer is one of those. Cancer is a common enemy. There's a clear synergy in working together, and I'm going to show you some of that. And it's an economic imperative that we do so. I'm wearing a pin. We've had this at our company since well before what am I allowed to say? The opportunity occurred. But it says, cancer has no borders, neither do we. That's the way that we run our company. We're just under 3,000 people. There's, close to 400 in the Bay Area. There's 2,000 in China. There's people in Europe. There's people in Australia. And when people ask us where we're headquartered, we don't have one. To have a headquarters means you've chosen. We haven't chosen. Our headquarters are on Zoom. And I've said that repeatedly, and I'm not flattering anyone that was at dinner last night. Evolution of cancer treatments, you probably know this, but there's huge impact. We started with surgery, cut it out. We moved to radiotherapy, and since we have our C-TRIP alumni here, this is the Madame Curie Hospital in Warsaw, Poland, where Victoria and I just went on an H&H, which is a C-TRIP company. Tremendous vacation. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Chemotherapy was let's kill fast-growing cells. And we had these very toxic targeted therapy in the 80s. And now finally, recently, really only in the last handful of years, we've proven that we can host our immune system to fight cancer. Huge impact. So what's next? Systems biology. We got to put this all together, figure out how it works, how we sequence it, how we combine it. It's a hard problem, but we need great research. Now, I have not copycatted. I've learned a lot from the previous presentation. Thank you again. And a lot of research is happening globally. A lot of it's happening in collaborations. And by the way, 50% of when it says it is said, that's in Chinese the way you say. I think these are the right numbers, but I didn't have time to look it up. So 50% of biology research papers have a Chinese surname on them. 30% of researchers in the industry in the United States in biotech are born in mainland China. So we're going to decouple? How's that going to work? I don't know. What's happened from all the research that we have? Well, these lines moving to the right are the overall survival rate for 5 years in different types of cancer. If you look at it, almost without exception, it's improved. These numbers are like 2007 to 2013, and the big impacts actually happened past 2013, but they don't have the data yet. We're getting much better. We're working together in oncology tremendously, and it's having huge impact, and it's being done from a global perspective in research. But is it unaffordable brilliance? you see the headlines in the United States about drug pricing. I go to the industry meeting and, people talk about, the world's tired of us bankrupting families when we cure their cancer, and we do that here in the US. We do it in Europe. In rich countries, probably 20% of the people are left behind. Either their government won't reimburse the drug or they can't afford it. And in poor countries, the industry really only serves the top 1% with the innovative drugs. This has been the case in China until 3 years ago. And in our industry, you may see the people and you may think, okay, yeah, that's a business case, but it's not, it's lives. And this is one of the most popular movies last year. My entire business relies on IP, but this is a movie about an Indian generics company importing, a guy who imports the drugs to China because people are dying of lymphoma, and this is a way for them to get Gleevec. It's a complicated problem. I'm all for everything, but it's a complicated problem. So how do we be more affordable in our industry? We have great scientific breakthroughs when we collaborate and work together globally, but how do we do it? Well, this is what we did at Stanford Business School. Primarily, the cost is driven in our industry. It's all upfront cost. It's almost like software. It's all about the research and the development and amortizing the failed projects. So where does it come from? The total upfront cost, some of it's research, but 90% of it is running clinical trials. 90% of it. And if you want to lower your cost per patient, how do you do it? It's market access. You have more patients paying for your drug. Pure and simple. There's two major changes that China made in the last several years that fundamentally will reshape oncology industry for the world unless we decide to decouple in some uncomfortable way. The first is China joined ICH, which means the harmonization of clinical trials. Now you can run clinical trials globally at the same time for China, Europe, and the US and Japan. It's spectacular. I'll tell you what it means in a second. And number of patients, China decided to nationally reimburse for the first time ever the most innovative oncology drugs in the world. If you look at Genentech, Roche, AstraZeneca, all of these companies, they're having the best years they've ever had in China. It's spectacular. Because the innovative drugs, they're now on national reimbursement. And I'll tell you how that works. The increased patient pool, this is the new incidences of cancer every year. The red bar is China. There's as much cancer in China. The green bars are countries that have pretty reasonable reimbursement. We've doubled the number of patients in the world that are in healthcare plans where they have reimbursement. It's spectacular. But what does reimbursement mean? China said, this is all upfront cost. We can do math. We can run the economics. There's a lot of patients here. Does the industry need us to pay the same amount we're paying in the US? It's the same upfront cost. Probably not. And they've shown what we're willing to pay, the average number here, this is left to right year after year, but is about $2,000 per patient per month. And in China now, if you have one of these drugs and the need for the drug, the prices are here, but the government will pay 70% of your cost. What is the average drugs here on the right-hand side equivalent to this $2,000 cost in the US? There's the number. The China reimbursement, roughly doubles the number of people reimbursed for oncology. There's just no question about that. And if you took half those patients, 40% of those patients at $2,000 per month, it would pour $50 billion into the industry. That's not going to happen in the next year. It's not going to happen for a handful of years, but eventually it could happen. And by the way, it is happening in the high single-digit billions in the immediate near term. So this is real. And what does that money go to? It either goes to lower cost globally, or it goes to more research, or it goes to gross and obscene profitability. But this is a great thing for the industry. There's a clear global synergy. This is making drugs globally more affordable. We can still be profitable, and essentially when you do this, we've talked about China and the US, you can make drugs more affordable to the next billion people. There's 400, 500 million people in Southeast Asia. There's people in the Middle East. There's people all over. We can get to those people. Basically, China doing this is going to flip the whole industry and help with drug pricing, which is a huge issue in the US. It's about coupling. It's not about decoupling. And if you decouple, you cannot do this. You can't do it. My company as a microcosm, these are things I believe. Conflict exists in any organization, in any group of people. Of course it does. There's always going to be bad actors. There's no question. Often with anything, there's two versions of a story, and that was before this morning's session, but it's true. There always are different ways to look at things. Conflicts predominantly from misunderstanding and miscommunication. When you actually get people to sit down and listen carefully and talk through things, almost always it works. We have the responsibility to help do this for the world right now. Generalizations are very, very, very harmful. When this happens in my company, immediately the attitude changes with everyone. Some things are dated. The air in Beijing the last 2 months has not been bad, it's been great. And hearing that it does, any of us that live in Beijing think, okay, that was an out-of-touch comment, that's okay. Some things are unintentionally racist. There's a debate in our company always about speed and quality and everything else. Guess what? There's a lot of things in China that the team does very quickly. Actually, it does things very quickly because it stays up and works all night, and it works on weekends, and it has a sense of passion and urgency that sometimes isn't quite as high here. Some people that join from a big company, some people that are in Europe, look at that and they say, well, if we go fast, we're going to sacrifice quality. And then they say, our China subsidiary doesn't care about quality. That means they don't care about patients. Our drugs go to patients. It's insulting. It's insulting. You can't make that generalization. You can talk about the facts. If you go fast, this is what it might mean. In our company, you can talk about specific examples. You can talk about what you want, but you cannot make generalizations like that. If you make a generalization like that, it destroys the entire fabric of your culture of working together. We have to avoid doing that. Trust is built by being familiar with people, spending time with them, letting them come, getting in a room with them, talking to them about things. Fear silences a dialogue. It destroys communication and understanding. Why is the non-Chinese person saying all these things at this forum? Do we have a welcome environment right now where anyone can say that, either here or in China? We need a welcome dialogue where we can talk honestly about what we feel and what our concerns are. Fear kills conversation. We have to admit our mistakes and our imperfections. The United States is not perfect on IP. Qualcomm sued Apple. There's a million examples of theft in our country too on IP. That doesn't mean it's right here, it's not. Doesn't mean it's right in China, it's not. And China needs to understand there's a perception here. Everyone needs to understand there's a perception here. This is a real issue. So we have to be even more cautious. It's a reality. We have to forgive people and move on. The mistakes I made 20 years ago, I don't want to be penalized for. Mistakes China made 20 years ago, my company made 4 years ago. Hopefully we can move on. We need to do this. And no one likes to be publicly humiliated. In my company, if someone makes a mistake, I don't scream at them in front of everyone. I go meet with them privately and I talk about what we could do differently. These are things I believe. And my lessons learned, it's not easy, it's hard work. It requires patience to get everybody to get along. The promise and reward, though, of collaboration far exceed the cost. And it's a delicate balance. We really have to take care of it, just like you do a garden. And cancerous attitudes and culture, we have to address them, and we have to stop them, and we can't tolerate them. We don't let those exist in our company. And talent like water flows. All of us know if we're building a company, you got to make it the best place to work for everyone. You don't do that by bad-mouthing your competitors. You do it by saying, this is a place where you're welcome. This is a place where you're going to be supported, valued, well compensated. And also, it has to be a place where you trust the system, where you believe you're safe, your family's safe, and where you believe that it's a fair system. These are things you want in a company. If you don't find them, you will leave. You'll go somewhere else. And unquestionably, today, there's unique tools for global collaboration. The thing we have that they didn't have in the Renaissance, that they didn't have before, is we have all the wonderful tools that have been built in Silicon Valley and everywhere else in the world to help us work together. All the travel applications so I can get to Beijing by 5 a.m. tomorrow morning to do a meeting. These things enable us to collaborate globally. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We should innovate, collaborate, and achieve more than anyone else has before. I'm born in America. I'm an American citizen. I love this country more than anything. I work a lot in China. I love China. I love my daughter, who is half Chinese and half American and born in Basel. But the one thing I can say absolutely all of us share is we're in the world right now together. We're the same generation. We can either be a great generation together or we can fight with each other. So I hope we're a great generation together. Thank you.
Great, so now we'll have a few minutes for discussion among the panel before we open up to questions from the audience, so be thinking of your questions. So I guess one theme that connects a couple of the panelists' remarks were the demographic challenges facing China. My friend Hal Varian, it's Google's chief economist, has this lovely quote that says, well, we may not know what robots are going to do in the next 20 years, but we do know how many 40-year-olds we're going to have in 20 years. And so out of all these unknowns, the demographic challenges are actually staring right at us, and James' slides really presented those to us quite starkly. So one thing I would love it if you could elaborate on a bit is, what do those demographic challenges mean for the direction of innovation and for the types of innovation that need to occur both in the US and in China?
Well, as I showed on the slide, that you have the number of young graduates continue to going to rise, but in 10 or 20 years, you'll see a rapid decline of the young, the number of young people, and number of young workers, and number of young researchers. So that will have a negative impact just from an input point of view on innovation, but also from a society point of view, from a macroeconomic point of view, you have a very high burden of supporting the old. So government may have a constraint on how much they can invest into new technology or even infrastructure. So a lot of money has to go to the pension system, and you have a higher tax burden. That's what happened in Japan. And also the society usually will get more conservative and less willing to try new technologies. Because we don't have a lot of experiences. Only a few countries have some experience of this aging society. Japan is one of the case studies in the book. And Japan, remember in the not long ago, like in the 80s, Japan was actually on a per capita basis much richer, or 30% higher than that of US. And now it's only 70%, now it's 30% poorer than the US. But it is exactly the same period that Japan went through a huge decline of young people and a huge rapid aging population. So that's not a very optimistic for China 20 years later. And the reason, as I said, in the near term, it's still going to be doing fine, but in the long run, it's not looking so good.
And so Ming, you've been doing a lot of investment in AI and also startups in China. From an investment perspective, how do you look at those demographic challenges, and what technological opportunities are there to perhaps meet them?
Yeah, it's a big challenge in China for the aging problem. You probably know, James did a lot of job for stop with a one-child policy. So basically in China, there's two big problems. Firstly, the percentage of the olders basically grow up very fast. Secondly, when they get older, basically they have a lot of young generation to take care. In China, we see a couple basically have to take care of 4 elders, and even like more than 4, because if their grandpa, grandma still be there. So it's a big challenge. In terms of the investment and the technology side, I personally, think one thing we have to solve the healthcare problem, because in China, the big challenge for the older generations, they do not have enough money, because they haven't been rich, but they're older. So that's a big challenge. So we have to develop some technology to provide affordable healthcare. So one company I started is called TipWise. It's basically use AI technology to do the medical imaging diagnosis. So it makes the whole system much cheaper, and it can provide the service basically even to the rural area if there's a good internet connection. Secondly, the old generation basically they do not have so many children. It means they will feel very lonely. So there's a big challenge in China, because the young generation do not have enough time to basically stay with their parents. So they're very lonely, especially when the couples lose one. There's only one there. So, and one of my friends is start a company now. He's trying to make affordable the AI puppy. Basically, can stay with the elders, can basically emotionally to help them to make them happy. So I do believe the technology can basically serve the society in terms of aging, in terms of demography. But still, like James said, the government have to do something too. At the same time, from private sector and from government sector, we have to working together to solve the problem.
So John, do you have anything to add about your R&D approaches to the aging population?
We're trying to just do the best we can to help them continue to age.
Excellent. So another kind of theme that's come through the day is the question of intellectual property, which of course is central to R&D. One of my observations in seeing R&D in the tech sector is that it's much less about patents and even trade secrets and more about know-how. And so, we saw engineers go from Yahoo to Microsoft and Bing, and then to Facebook, and then to Uber. And it's not so much that they were copying what they did in the last firm, but they had understood how to innovate, how to do A/B testing well, how to do to simulate new features, how to organize and manage, and to take machine learning and AI to scale. And if you think about it that way, the copying of intellectual property is less of an issue, and it's much more about the flow of people. Now, Silicon Valley had an advantage there for a bit because that's where a lot of the innovation was happening, but now we're also seeing equal or larger R&D operations in China. So how do we think about these issues? I mean, is the intellectual property issue less of an issue in this new era with a different way of doing innovation? And is it even possible to think about protection or keeping those ideas within borders in this context?
I mean, look, I think it's a real issue. I think it's an issue in the US, and I think it's an issue in China. And I think that it's something that is challenging, because where's the line between you've built your professional career versus something that's truly belongs to a company? But absolutely, that's an ongoing, real question everywhere. And we should be asking it, and we should be trying to do the right things. And from the other perspective, the thing that would be very unfortunate to see, in my industry and research, like I said, 30% of the people are from China. So if you just take an average, 30% of the issues are going to relate to someone who's a Chinese national if there's bad actors, and if on average it's all the same. So if that turns into an issue that is, suddenly interpreted a different way, it has a real danger from that perspective. So I think that it's good to talk about intellectual property. We absolutely should. And I think we should have the dialogue about the right way to have it and enforce it. But I don't think we should, I think when we're doing that, we should provide it with the appropriate context of, this is not just an issue with China. It's a broad issue for the industry, and it's an issue from that perspective. And I think that we all should work to find the right answer and absolutely have a rules-based system where we all respect it. We have to.
So any other comments?
Yeah, from my point of view, it depends always. What I see is, for example, in the internet, there's very few IP problem because if you launch a new website, new application, other companies will learn very fast. So, but from hardware side, we see, companies protect the IP very seriously. So it looks like when we think about this, the software side, especially the internet side, the developer internet service very fast. It's basically the lifetime of the new technology or new kind of service, probably like 1 to 2 years. Very short, then it's changed so fast. It's basically meaningless to protect. So it makes, when I talk to my friends, when we think about the future, in the hardware side, we always think, too optimistic. We think about, some hardware will happen, for example, the smart home stuff. We think about like 10 years ago, but now, do we have smart home? No. So the hardware, it's basically take very long time. But in terms of the soft side, internet software is developed very fast. A lot of times, we think, well, it's happened in 5 years, but next year there's there. So everything's changed. For example, the mobile application. So only like 2 to 3 years, you can get mobile everything. So it looks a lot of difference between hardware and the software. That's from my point of view. In terms of software sector, sometimes like AI, if soft side we mean like machine learning or deep learning models, it's pretty open because everyone publish the paper, the new model, and people can build up. So it's developed super fast. So from my point of view, it's openness. A lot of times means like the innovation can go faster and the whole industry can go faster.
Yeah, I completely agree because in the internet, the AI, the algorithm is kind of open source. It's really the data that makes difference, and you really cannot copy the data, so it becomes less a problem. At least my industry.
Yes, so actually let me pick up on that. One of the themes that's come up in some discussions about research, arms races, especially in AI, is the role of data and the size of the consumer base. And so, if you want to have sufficient scale to operate a search engine or a large web platform, the size of a European country is too small to really support the R&D. And as we've seen the Chinese market mature, we've actually seen a number of industries leap ahead. For example, educational technology, there's more innovation, more large-scale products in China than in the US, in part because of the larger user base. So I'm curious where you see that going, and in what other sectors do we see that the innovation might get ahead in China because of the larger data sets and larger user base?
Well, if it's a pure information product where you can really replicate very quickly globally, I think because the potential is global. It's really China, even though with a large population, is only maybe 7% of the total population of the world. So U.S. U.S. could I think still has an advantage because it can more quickly expand or globalize its product than the Chinese company, especially when Chinese companies are not very familiar with Google, Facebook, social media, the primary way of marketing their products. So I think if the product's information only and global, then US company still has the edge. But if it's a manufacturing-oriented product, because China can throw more R&D into it, has a very good supply chain, conglomeration effect already built. So I think on the hardware and manufacturing side, China is probably going to have the scale advantage. So it's really between US probably still have an advantage on the software and pure information products.
Great. Well, so now actually I'd like to open it up to questions from the floor. So I think we have some microphones coming around. Let's see, I see a question over here. And
So Amy Gu, Hemi Ventures. I have two questions. So the first one is to John. Actually, really want to acknowledge what you just said about your company's efficiency, because we just had a portfolio companies actually about to work with you guys, and then they speak very highly of how productive the meeting is with your company in China. But our portfolio is based here, so definitely appreciate I think what you just shared. And my question is, it's actually very rare to see an American kind of entrepreneur succeed in China. I was wondering, what's your secret recipe there in terms of, I think, for other, I think, people from here to go to China to start a company? That'd be my first question to John. And then my second question is to James. I think your research about, I think, the Chinese students with college degree and the American students graduate with college degree, and the comparison, I think, is super interesting. It's actually my first time to see something like this, like in comparison. My question is, are there a way to compare the quality of college education in China and US quantitatively? I was just in China a couple days ago, and I met this recent graduate from a university in Shandong. And I was actually asking her about, hey, you just graduated. Are there anything you want to learn? How's your new job? And then she just keeps saying, oh, I want to learn something new to make some new skills to make money. And I was just curious. It's like, hey, you just graduated from college. I mean, you should have learned all the skills from the college. But she's not like, no, it's not enough. I want to learn more about new skills and to make more money. And her monthly salary is like $500 or something, as I remember. So I'm just wondering if you have some comparison about the the quality of college education between China and U.S.
So, sorry, the college, what community?
The quality of the quality of the college degrees. Just in terms of the quality of the education, because I think in your numbers it looks like it's a.
Yeah, let me just, I think she was just asking you to compare the quality and saying that the graduates in China might still feel unprepared.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to take that first, and we can come back to John?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult to compare the quality of college. If you just look at the test scores, I'm probably sure the Chinese students would do very well. But if you look at the general skills like communication skills, of course, English is very important. Also, becoming more important as more and more Chinese company tries to global, and China, of course, the U.S. American students will have an edge. But I think in general, Chinese students work very hard. They're improving very rapidly in terms of numbers, in terms of quality. So I think Chinese, the quality is not something that China has a huge disadvantage of. It's really, the numbers will go up, then it will come down rapidly. That's the biggest problem, yeah.
So John, did you have any comment there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I loved being at Stanford, not just because of the beautiful campus and the great, teachers here, but I loved it because of the people I got to know during that time. And 3 of the people that were closest to me at Stanford are gone. And I'm doing this company because I'm facing my mortality and I want to fight for life. And that's a decision I made. And at the time I went to China, I did it because I looked at the way I thought the world was evolving, and I thought that these things would happen, and as they did, it would fundamentally change the industry, and there was a business opportunity. And I think that, I flowed there because I thought there was an opportunity. Why have I been able to be successful there? I think that when you really care about something deeply, you never give up. And I think that, in that process, how I would say I tried to listen carefully, and I tried to understand and, adjust my preconceived notions and the one way of doing business that we're very common with here in the United States. And I think that I found an environment full of people that were just passionate about doing something, anything, and ready to go do something together. And I think that, it's really, listening and, understanding that there's different ways of looking at things and adjusting the way you operate. So, I don't know, I think do what you're passionate about and make it happen anywhere in the world.
I think we have time for one more question back there.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Bruce Robinson. I've actually resided in Shanghai for over the last 10 years and seen it become an R&D center. And so, John, if you could just speak a little bit about how globally you manage your R&D in China. Is it just in China for China, or is it a part of a global strategy? And then secondarily, just an observation, I live in the new part of Shanghai, but when I go to Puxi, the old side, what I notice is so many old people. Over a third of the city is over the age of 60, I think. And if the other gentleman could just talk a little bit about the policies the government could do to increase, either to encourage families to have more children, because when they abolished the one-child policy, I think maybe 10 or 15% of the couples took advantage of that. So will it be through immigration, which the Japanese have rejected and therefore their populations have shrunken, or will it be through literally paying families to have more children in order for China not to grow old so quickly? Thank you.
Quickly on the R&D side, I think everything we did, we believe that we're in an industry that's global. We believe everything you're doing for everyone in the world you can possibly get your drug to. So it needs to meet the US, European, Chinese, Japan, everywhere else requirements. So everything we're doing is the highest, quality and standard imaginable. And I think that, we're doing that because it's the right thing to do. It's one disease. You're not going to give someone a lower quality version of a drug. That would be a terrible thing to do. So, and the second reason is because it's one disease, there is a huge economy of scale of getting to the whole world. We're not worried about local Chinese competitors that are just trying to compete in China, and by doing that can be 20% less expensive because their drug is only going to address 1.4 billion people. Our drug, we hope, can address 4 or 5 billion people in the world. And again, all the cost is up front. If you get it to those people, your average cost is much lower. It's a much better business model. So.
Wonderful. So,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
I think, did he ask about aging and immigration or something? Yeah, I just really just quickly comment that, well, China is the only country that cannot solve its aging problem by immigration. And currently, Japan has started loosening immigration and trying to attract more immigrants to Japan to solve its aging problem. But China, given its size, it's just not enough people around the world to attract. And China has to solve its problem by itself. And given the experience of other East Asian countries which with similar culture like Japan and Korea, it's a very, very difficult job to persuade young Chinese to have more babies.
So thank you all so much for a wonderful panel. Just some final closing thoughts. One thing that I took out of this was tying back to some earlier discussions today. We do have some really important common problems between the United States and China, and the demographic problems in supporting the aging population, and of course is also a severe problem in Europe. And so that seems like a great opportunity for collaboration. Another interesting point is these scale economies that really allow us to improve R&D and improve innovation. We heard about it in drugs, but of course also for AI-based solutions, whether it's devices to help the elderly age in the home, devices to help the elderly stay in the workforce more safely by removing physical components or having memory assistance and so on. There are many, many opportunities for innovation that would benefit from having a larger scale of a population to apply those innovations to. And so I'm really excited about that common goal that perhaps we can find ground on. And a final remark is I actually didn't expect us to be talking so much about sort of culture on this panel, but I thought that John's remarks about how we can work together and the processes that will help us find that common ground were really profound. So thank you, John, for sharing those with us. And with that, I'll thank the panel, and we'll move on to a break. Thank you.